Good morning, everyone. This is Manikandan Jayaraman. I am an architect and I work for Fidelity Investments, like what Nupur said, and I'm part of the enterprise architecture team. Um, I'm pretty certain that none of us in the audience will question the need for enterprise architecture, and I'm also pretty certain that nobody is going to question the effectiveness or what unified enterprise architecture and architecture practice can do to the organization. And we all agree that by making enterprise architecture unified across standardizing architecture across the organization is going to bring in a lot of benefits and make life simpler. Today, I'm going to talk about effective enterprise architecture governance and what does it solve for the enterprise and how does it enhance the organization's agility. So let's move on to the agenda. The agenda is pretty simple. The first thing that we'll be looking into is what are our day-to-day and strategic architecture challenges in an organization. We'll then talk about the challenges, right? We'll try to generalize all these challenges and see what's the cause and what's the effect of these challenges. We'll also then talk about effective enterprise architecture outcomes as to what are the benefits that it kind of brings. And then we will talk about what we need to consider in building an effective enterprise architecture platform. And of course, the framework for the enterprise architecture governance model. Okay, so the next three slides, let me give a context for the next three slides together. The next three slides are going to flash few questions that will come into our mind, either to deliver our day-to-day tasks or towards a strategic work, right? This slide talks about day-to-day challenges that come in towards answering our problem at hand. Let me read out a few of these questions for you. How do I visualize my business portfolio? There are three solutions that solve my use case, but which one does my organization prescribes? Can I use this open source library? Can I use this large language model? Are there guidelines and patterns around implementing an external facing API? So the questions will start from, say, business and will enter into the landscape, IT landscape, and then you will have questions all over. And I have just given a few sample questions in the next three slides, but the questions could be enormous, right? Let me go on to the next slide, which talks about strategic challenges. And of course, I have created some roles in the organization, and I have highlighted questions which come for each and every role here. The way I want this slide to be read, I have just highlighted a few of them in bold, but that doesn't mean the unbolded ones are not priority. All of these are important questions, and there are more questions like what I said. These are just samples, right? So from a CEO perspective, how aligned are our IT investments with our business goals? How can we improve our IT agility and responsiveness? These are kind of questions which kind of comes in a CEO's mind towards taking the organization forward. Let's look at the CIO level of questions where they mostly are aligned towards KPIs and how do we optimize the cost structure. All of these concerns from the operational angle would be the concerns for a COO. A CTO is going to strategically take the technology organization forward, so might be more worried in terms of technology obsolescence, and also about how does the emerging technologies impose a risk for the organization, or how can they be leveraged to gain some competitive edge. Some more strategic challenges, again, based on a few more user personas. Architects will have their own set of challenges, business users, developers, audit. They will all have their own challenges. And all I'm trying to say here is I'm not specifically saying these are the only questions, and I'm not saying these questions are hard to find solutions for, right? We will be able to definitely find solutions for all of these, but the bigger problem here is we'll have to scramble through a lot of information available on multiple different documentation portals, multiple different stakeholders. You'll have to talk to the architect, you'll have to talk to different people in different roles to come to a conclusion or come to an answer for any of these questions. And more importantly, how do you verify whether these answers are authentic and authoritative, right? So you will have to also look at, okay, I have the answer for this question, but how do I really trust it is just this and not anything more? Am I missing anything? So there is no authoritative guidance without the presence of enterprise architecture. And that's how I would call or strategize all these challenges. Let me now look at it in terms of the cause and effect. So we have challenges that we have today. Let's kind of try to generalize them into the cause and effect. The left side is all the cause. So why is this happening, right? So why are these questions not so easily answerable? The main problem here is the disconnect between the business capabilities and the IT landscape. So when I say business capabilities, that defines the what of the problem. The business processes that defines the how of the problem are not connected to the IT applications that solve the problem. So you have everything there, but you see a disconnect between all of these. There is no single unified platform or unified authoritative way to connect them together. Of course, architecture is definitely practiced in every organization without any doubt, but they are practiced in siloed form, right? Different BUs have their own architecture prescriptions. So there is lack of collaborative guidance. And this can lead to redundant applications. It can lead to work duplication. It can lead to proliferation of applications, right? Vendor applications as well. Each BU to solve their problem might engage with a vendor, try to bring in them, onboard them, and solve their problem. But there is no vendor consolidation that happens because each BU don't talk to the other BU before they solve the problem. So what are the effects of these problems? There is difficulty towards application rationalization. By that, what I mean is we might have a lot of outdated applications, unused applications, redundant applications, and the IT landscape looks very chaotic and complex. Let's say you want to modernize an application without knowing what this application, where all this application gets interfaced with, which all applications does my application talk to. I will not be so confident to modernize or to revamp any piece of the application. End of support, end of life, risk management. That's again a very crucial aspect. Because of lack of discoverability around outdated or end of life technologies, you're going to have serious security risks leading to service failures, leading to a reputation damage, and which can potentially lead us to loss of customers as well. With all these problems that we have discussed so far, let me categorize the outcomes into 4 different buckets. I'm starting at the left with the optimization. So under optimization, if you see what can enterprise architecture practice bring to the organization, it helps you to rationalize applications. It gives you the benefit of license optimization. You'll be able to look at your platform, try to discover how many vendors are involved in solving a particular problem. You'll be able to consolidate the vendor. And even if that vendor, if you see different business units are having separate license contract with the vendor, you'll be able to optimize the licensing by entering into an enterprise level license agreement with the vendor. So these things can help you to optimize and strategize your IT landscape. It's going to promote a lot of discoverability from a single platform, from a single place. You will get authoritative guidance towards discovering architecture and discovering best practices. And it's also going to lead to productive collaboration. When you have questions, you know whom to contact, who all can help you in giving you more light and visibility into the problem and into the solution as well. Let's talk about reduced risk. The compliance to standards and best practice unified across the whole organization will definitely help you to reduce risk. It will also help you to efficiently solve your IT incidents because you exactly know to trace an end-to-end user experience and isolate the problem and be able to provide quick resolution. It also improves business agility. So organizations react effectively to changing markets and customer environments. It helps you to strategize your changes effectively, and you'll be able to have a competitive edge in the market because you have better visibility into your existing user experience, existing products, platforms, and you'll be able to easily react to the changing needs. Improved governance. This is the heart and soul of your enterprise architecture governance model. Once you have enterprise architecture and once you have the practice being followed, you will have clear roles and responsibilities in the system. This will lead to architectural consistencies across the board, and it will also enhance strategic alignment that aligns policies, procedures towards the business. So the connectivity between the IT landscape and the business capabilities will help you to get improved governance. So I'm now going to talk about building effective enterprise architecture. And if you look at this, let's start from the top, the circle on the top, which says define objectives and requirements. And this, if you look at this and if you go clockwise, this will almost resemble like our software development lifecycle. But I just wanted to quickly point out few interesting areas that will help you to build effective enterprise architecture in this route. So let's look at, we all know requirements and defining objectives is going to be the key for any software before you start building it. But selecting the right tools is going to be very, very key for enterprise architecture. First thing is you need to first gather the entire application inventory inside your organization. And then you probably want to know each of these applications, where are they located? How are they deployed? Where is the code base? Which systems do they go and interact with? So each of this information is not very easy to go and collect, right? So you're going to have challenges in collecting this information. So which means you need to go and talk to different data lakes, data sources to get your questions or to get your data under one roof. So the right tool that we choose for managing your enterprise architecture is very key. It needs to have the capability to talk to disparate data sources and to also other applications that exist within the organization. So you'll have to see if there is a integration that's available for your SaaS offering or a homegrown tool, whatever is going to be your enterprise architecture platform. That platform needs the ability to interface to multiple different endpoints. Could be database endpoints, data lake, APIs, whatever it could be, but it should be in a position to go and pull data from disparate data sources. Let's talk about developing a centralized repository now. This is very key because if your data, if your architecture information is stored in multiple different data sources, it becomes difficult for you to expose it to your associates. It's actually ideal to have a single documentation repository, a single documentation medium, like let's say Confluence or something else that your organization is using. And that could help us to create a standard around it in terms of how you deliver your information to the associates. Most importantly, it should also help you in effective metadata management, which helps in discoverability, right? With effective metadata management, I also want to bring out if we can bring in some templates around how your architecture will be presented. Like, for example, every architecture page should have a business context, should have a component diagram, a system diagram, a database diagram. It talks about your deployment topology, it talks about your security topology. So if you kind of create a standard template, which all systems have to follow, which all applications have to follow, that brings in a lot of standardization and easy to discover information. This also involves, if your application is already having documentations in some different templates, it also involves bringing them, aligning them into the standard template as much as possible, so you can deliver consistent experience with respect to sharing information. Implementing governance and standards, this is going to keep the enterprise architecture practice thriving. So you'll establish policies and standards that guide consistent architecture development. And this gets more prescriptive at this point in time without a governing body. So you need to have a governance in place, which helps you to evaluate, approve, and oversee architectural decisions and also architectural compliance. I have a separate slide which talks about the governance framework. So we will move on to the next stage or the next item here in this page, which is about enable collaboration and sharing. So you'll have to enable collaboration in the platform, and that comes through discoverability. So let's say I want to build a specific application and I need a specific capability within that application that I'm trying to build. Now your platform should be in a position to help you identify, surface out the existing solutions that are available to satisfy that capability, along with contacts as to which business unit, who is the architect for that particular solution, who can I talk to. And this helps in healthy collaboration. Instead of scrambling through a lot of documentations, I will be able to directly go talk to the person to gain a lot of insights and leverage on the experience to reuse the same solution or to address the gaps inside my application. Make sure the information is easy to discover and also to share among associates. That's going to be very key for the platform's adoption and usage. Provide training and support. So you'll have to first define your user personas. I think we had a slide, 3-4 slides before, where I touched upon strategic challenges specific to different user personas. So once you have those personas, you would like to create user experiences for each of those personas as to what will that particular user persona look for in my application and how can I satisfy that need. And you'll also have to train those user personas on how to use this platform effectively. When it comes to monitoring and improving, this is part of any software. So you'll have to continue to enhance your application to the changing needs, to the evolving needs of the organization. So you need to gather a lot of feedback. And how do you gather this feedback? You'll be able to run some surveys within your organization. You can probably have a net promoter score for your own platform and then see where you stand and how you improve. You can probably go back to engage with any auditing tool which can help track users coming into your application, track the usage, how is your usage on the platform increasing or decreasing month on month. And these are good insights for you to understand how to improve adoption, how to improve the usage of the platform. And of course, you can go talk back to your stakeholders and ask them what problems do they face today and what information they are not able to discover, what would be good to have in the platform. And these will help you to define your new objectives or new requirements, and you again circle through all these steps to see how you solve it. So I'm getting on to my last slide here, which is talking more about architecture governance model. Without a governance model in place, the platform will just exist as a prescriptive guidance, right? And it cannot be used effectively. The main objective of the governance is to bring in standards. Number one, you'll have to ensure adoption and make sure that the enterprise architecture practice is thriving. You can sustain with the practice, and you can also make associates happy and effective with their day-to-day and strategic challenges. I've broadly classified this into 6 buckets, and I'm starting at the top right here, which is the governance framework. Establishing policies and standards that guide consistent architecture development is the key. So you need to have your guardrails around how should an application be developed and what are my guardrails towards developing the application. And this should be standardized across all business units. You need to define a process for evaluating, approving, and overseeing the architecture decisions. So the governance process definitely needs a governing body, which is where the organization structure comes in. Let me talk a bit about how the structure can look like. Let's say your entire set of applications within your enterprise is broken down into multiple business capabilities. And amongst these capabilities, we will have to look at how these capabilities can function in terms of a new application coming in terms of verifying an existing common solution that existing inside this capability. So what you will be trying to do here is each capability can be driven by a separate governing body, like a steering committee, which meets at a regular cadence, will identify their backlogs. When a new solution comes into the ecosystem, it gets aligned to one of these capabilities, and that steering committee will be coming into a lot of discussions to understand the fitment of that solution inside that capability and the requirements that this solution should adhere to become a common solution to be used across the enterprise. The steering committee can still have a lot of subdivision underneath it because a business capability is very broader and you can have multiple sub capabilities underneath it. Like, for example, if I'm talking about integration services, you can have file based integration, you can have API based integration, you can have streaming based integration. So you're going to have multiple different sub capabilities, and each sub capability can still have its own working group and can focus on that area and roll up to a steering committee or a council, which will again uh, be the central body governing the overall agenda and uh, overall standards for that particular capability. Now that we have all these capabilities, we need, and each capability will also have a capability lead, right? And the lead will oversee all these operations. Now we have multiple business capabilities, and we have multiple steering committees. We have working groups underneath it, and this becomes a little complex structure. But again, if you see from capability perspective, we are looking at some siloed operations. So there should be something to tie all these back into the uh, overall architecture governance practice. So you can have uh, an overarching committee or a enterprise architecture practices council under which all of them will roll into. And you will also look at how you can set up these cadence for them to regularly meet. And here, the next three or four uh, buckets, what I'm going to discuss now, are more likely talking about the responsibilities of this overarching council. The overarching enterprise architecture practices council can look at decision making and accountability. It has to make sure that we are making transparent decision making process. We are implementing a transparent decision making process, and we are also able to monitor compliance to the established standards and policies. We'll have to make sure if a new standard is coming into play or my standards and policies are getting amended, you'll have to make sure you discuss about that with all these councils and make sure that they accept and they will strive to align with those amendments. How do you achieve this? How will the enterprise architecture practice council achieve all these things? With respect to decision making, with respect to measuring compliance, adoption, and things like that. So you need to have a lot of reports and metrics built into your system, which will help them to look at two things. How are the standards and policies adopted? And also to measure enterprise architecture quality. When I talk about quality, all I mean is this. We are now prescribing something in common for the whole organization, which means it has to follow certain standards. We need to make sure anything new that is coming in or anything that gets enhanced still does not violate any of these standards and policies. Like, for an example, every application that we say is preferred as a common solution for the whole enterprise must have a well-defined architecture page. It must have sufficient documentation available. It must have good operational, the operational aspects of that common solution is covered in terms of having a proper incident management around it, having good observability around it. How will they support customers? How will they support other applications when they onboard into the application? So starting from the end-to-end experience, onboarding into the application and covering their day-to-day, there are a set of requirements that each application has to adhere to. And that's when it becomes a common solution for adoption. And as enterprise architecture governance model should be in a position to measure the quality of these common solutions and make sure their fitment into this ecosystem for common adoption. And all of these can only be done through proper reports, which can surface out the differences, the gaps, and we'll be able to use these reports to go back to the solution owner and ask them to correct it and get them fit enough for common adoption. Communication and collaboration is, like what I said, very key because different capabilities will have their own set of questions and challenges towards enterprise architecture compliance, and you will have to answer them on regular basis. You will have to talk to them on their concerns and bring them into alignment. So the discussion has to happen in regular cadence where it should be bidirectional, where we go as an enterprise architecture team, go and talk to them about anything new or anything that's changing. At the same time, we hear back from them on the challenges that they have and try to do some amendments to make sure their concerns are addressed. There are multiple ways of doing this, having some regular meetings to do this, and then you can also have different business units and a lead from every business unit to come into a meeting where they would become your point of contact to drive the best practices and common architecture across that's being prescribed into their own business units to bring in that enterprise compliance. Continuous improvement is key for any system and for any practice. So one of the ways you can achieve compliance is by creating KPIs that can be given individually to every capability lead, to the business unit leads, and they will have to comply towards meeting those KPIs. And this will automatically bring in compliance to enterprise architecture. And you'll also have to build in feedback mechanisms through communication and collaboration, of course, to refine the governance model from time to time. So that's pretty much what I have from slides perspective. All I wanted to say here is we covered few different things at a very high level. We spoke about what is required from enterprise architecture point of view. What is enterprise architecture? What are the challenges do we have today from day-to-day and strategic angles? We also spoke about how can these challenges be addressed through enterprise architecture. We spoke about what we should consider when we build an enterprise architecture platform. We also spoke about what could be the key items towards having the enterprise architecture governance model, right? We have been practicing this in our organization for the past 2 years, and I've been actively involved in building this for my organization. Of course, when we start these kind of practices, to bring in a common alignment across the enterprise from siloed architectures to enterprise architecture could be a very big journey. It involves a lot of discussions to bring in that alignment towards enterprise architecture, and these challenges can't be summarized into a slide, right? So I'm open for any questions out here, and I will try to answer as much as possible to address your questions. Over to you, Nupur.
Hey, thank you so much, Mani, for this insightful session. We have a lot of questions, and I would request people to keep on dropping their questions in the chat box to keep the conversation going. And for the ones who are asking for the presentation and the recording of the session, please drop us a note at events@zenove.com. We will keep you posted on the same. So let's get started with the questions. So a few of the questions that we received is, so Mani, is it possible for you to take a real life example and explain how your team had gone through architecture maturity?
Okay, so architecture maturity comes in from multiple angles, right? For your application, what does architecture maturity means, right? And I think every organization will have their own standards around it. We classify the application from severity angle. We'll call them as tier 0, tier 1, tier 2. Some applications will have a recovery time objective of, say, less than a minute. Some applications can withstand for a day. So depending on the application severity, you will have different requirements coming in for your application, right? The application should have a DR in place, for example, a disaster recovery system in place. And should this be hot or hot warm or hot cold? Again, these are all defined by the severity of the application. So this comes like how your general architecture practice being followed in any organization. This comes in like what your organization prescribes for your application based on the recovery time objective, recovery point objective, and things like that. It automatically dictates architecture maturity for your application. The second angle I would like to call is, how do you make sure this application is not an application for your business unit or for your need, and it becomes a common application which can be used by other applications within your enterprise. There we will have to bring in some standards towards bringing the maturity in that application, right? If I'm an application which if it's being used only by my business unit for some internal work, I can just follow whatever standards I need to follow as per my BU architecture guideline, rolling up to some standard principles around enterprise architecture, right? But at the same time, if my application is going to be used by 10 different applications within the enterprise, now I should have a support model towards it. How do I onboard this new customer for using my application? What are the support needs? What is the SLA do they expect? What response time I should serve the information back to them? Do I have a proper support model in place in case if my application is down, and if the consuming application is more critical than the consuming application cannot be more into a more critical tier than my application, right? Because if my application can be allowed to be offline for 1 hour, but if the consuming application cannot withstand 1 hour of downtime without getting a response, then it kind of conflicts, right? So you need to understand if the support model between my application and consuming application is in line. Are they aligned together? Do I have a proper support group round the clock to support and service my customers? So you can look at it as well managed, 4 buckets, right? Well managed, well engineered, well operated, well tested. So you'll have to probably look at all these angles to classify your application as a common solution, which can be used by other applications as well. So like what I said, to summarize, answer for the question, there are 2 angles to look at it. One is like, depending on the application severity within your organization, you will automatically have a set of things you should comply with for your application to be architecturally mature. The second angle is, if your application is not a siloed one, if it's a common application, common solution being used by others, you'll have to look into these 4 tenets: well managed, well engineered, well tested, and well operated. And you'll have to make sure your application is indeed a common solution.
Okay, thanks. So the next question that we have is, are there any tools that would allow the discovery of application inventory, associated infrastructure, and integrations for each of the apps to provide an enterprise-wide visibility of the landscape?
Okay, so I think every application, again, every organization will have their own way to host applications, right? There are multiple applications in market. ServiceNow is a very big example. We see multiple organizations using ServiceNow. And your application registry for your organization can be hosted in any homegrown or a SaaS offering, right? So you will be able to keep it anywhere. And the point here is not about just having the application registered into a registry. The point here is about where is the application source code resides, for example. What are the open source libraries the application is using, right? What are where is the application deployed, right? What are the standards being followed for releasing a product into production, for releasing this application into production? So do we have the release candidate prepared from, say, proper Git branching standards? Do we have a proper release candidate coming out of a release branch, or is it coming from any XYZ feature branches? Is my artifact that I propose to deploy to production going through some standards checks to make sure it's not violating the company's security policies or security standards, right? So things like that will come into will come into play when you want to look at inventory. So to answer all these questions, each of those questions will be answered through a different data source. You might have a different evidence store where you might where you might store the artifact. You might have a different evidence store where you store the code. So you might have different places where each of these questions you need to go information and gather from these different sources to bring them all into one inventory, right? And once you have all this data into one database or one data store, now you will be able to tell whether this application is following all the standards or not, right? So that's how I would say this. So there could be tools to have one inventory to collect all my application within excuse me, to collect all the applications within the organization, right? But it doesn't stop there. What we need to look at is whether the application is following standard development practices, standard deployment practices before entering, and standard, say, if you're using public cloud, you have to look at whether it's following the right cloud practices. And you need to gather information from multiple data sources, including the app registry, and bring them all into one place. So you'll be able to create meaningful reports around it to gauge their, compliance to enterprise standards.
I think in context of that, we have the another question where people are asking, like, how do we improve the documentation around architecture and what process can be followed? So, like, in general, they feel that this is something which is missing in most of the places. So that's why, if you can help us, give us a little view on this point.
Completely agree to this question. It's very, very important for us to deliver architecture to your associates in a consumable format and in a standardized format. Many organizations might have 2 or 3 documentation portals where they store documents. Some could be a file storage repository where, for example, let's take Microsoft SharePoint. So if you store there, you will probably store them as files. Mm-hmm. If you store in something like a Wikipedia, you can create rich text, which is consumable not as an attachment, but like a website or a web page, right? So there are many ways organizations have stored, and every BU might find some tool or the other which is easy for them to follow. But then bringing consistency is going to be very, very important from 2 angles. And this can't be achieved without everybody aligning towards and agreeing towards one standard, right? Which is that standard? I don't want to give any suggestions here because every company will have their own say or own ways to find fitment into one of these documenting platforms. But what we need to make sure is it following a proper template? When I'm saying template, you will have to create templates. How do I document a standard? How do I document a pattern? These standards talk about the what, the who and the what will become part of standards and policies, right? How it is done will be a pattern, right? And the actual implementation would be a solution for which you need an architecture. So if you look at all of these, you need to create separate templates as to how you can document a pattern, how you can document a standard, how you can document an application architecture. And the template can be designed and agreed by all different business units. And the enterprise management platform can surface out reports and make sure if each of those applications are following those templates to create their architecture content. And if the content is already in place, we need to create separate effort to align that back into this template. And that becomes a challenge. Teams might resist because of their delivery deadlines, timelines, and this might probably go into the backseat, but we'll have to constantly nudge them, ask them to comply to this template so it becomes unified across the enterprise.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question that we have is, let's say in the case of platform modernization, where we have a little information about how this is currently being used, how much time would be adequate for discovery, and how do we go about choosing the right tools to modernize it?
Can you repeat the first part?
So it says in the case of platform modernization, where we have a little information about how this is currently being used, how much time would it be adequate for discovery, and how do we go about choosing the right tools to modernize it?
Yeah, so architecture page is the key here, right? So when you create an architecture template, you're going to very clearly articulate sections in that page, which talks about, let's say, your component diagram. Your component diagram is going to talk about your application as a central component, but you're going to lead multiple arrow marks, if I can say in literal words, to different systems, internal to some internal module or to an external system. So if you know for sure that my architecture is properly put in place in the documentation, whenever you want to modernize, you exactly know the upstream systems and the downstream systems for your component. And you will be able to go talk to them and ask them in terms of, talk to them about your modernization and talk to them about their needs towards your revamped application, right? So how will they, suppose you're going to probably, let's say you have a SOAP endpoint at this point in time, kind of a very, very simple I would say even a bad example. You have a SOAP endpoint, but you are trying to revamp your application to start using REST APIs and GraphQL, for example. But let's say you have downstream applications which are trying to consume from your SOAP endpoint at this point in time. With an architecture page in place, you will be able to gauge the upstream and downstream impacts in terms of how you want data to come in and how you want data to flow out and what do they expect out of you today, and giving them sufficient timelines towards starting to migrate from your legacy endpoint to the new revamped endpoint. So architecture diagram is going to be the key, and it should be live. And this brings to one more important point, Nupur. What I wanted to tell the audience here is architecture freshness is one more important metric that this platform should surface. If you say your application is very critical, if you say it's a common solution that's used by multiple systems, you need that architecture page to be fresh enough, right? It has to be thriving. It cannot be, the page can't be having a last modified date of, say, 2 years or 1 year before. What that means is the architect has not come back into the page to look into and to revise it, right? Definitely, if it's a common solution, a lot of work would be happening on daily basis. So the page, the architecture page can't be, more than 6 months old. So architecture freshness is one indicator which your platform should surface. The architecture management platform should surface and make sure all my architecture pages for all the preferred solutions, for all the required common solutions are definitely, fresh enough, and they are not less than 6 months old. Freshness is not acceptable. So you can probably put those kind of standards around it. You start measuring, you go back to the application architects and ask them to revisit to comply to this freshness requirements, right? And then these will help you to go towards application modernization, because your architecture is fresh, it's intact, it has all the upstream and downstream properly laid out. So when you want to modernize, you know who to reach out to, who has to be given sufficient time towards complying to the revamped application. So that's how it will help. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I hope so. So the next, I think, with this, I think we have another question which talks about the KPIs.
Uh-huh.
Like, what KPIs would you recommend for measuring the success of the enterprise architecture governance initiatives? And how frequently do you think that these should be reviewed to ensure that they remain relevant?
Yep. I spoke about this enterprise architecture practices committee, right? The practices committee is going to be the one which makes sure the enterprise architecture is being followed by all the business units, and also to ensure alignment. So this committee would come up with KPIs, right? Some examples of the KPIs I can probably call out are, I just already spoke about the architecture freshness, right? So architecture freshness indicator could be one KPI, and you go back and tell every BU that if you have a preferred solution, if you have a more critical application, the architecture page should be fresh enough. It should not be, the page should be at least updated within the last 6 months. So that could be one KPI that we give for, and every BU might have 10 preferred applications or 20 preferred applications, and they will have to make sure at the end of the year they meet this KPI, right? That helps us to ensure the architecture pages are fresh, and that helps ensure in turn on the architecture, enterprise architecture alignment as well. One more example, if I want to call out, let's take a completely different example. Let's say we are migrating applications from on-prem to cloud, right? You can create KPIs for all the business units and say, by end of this year, let's say 30% of your applications should migrate from on-prem to cloud, right? And how do you measure this as a KPI? You can probably create some reports which will surface the on-prem application decommissioning versus the cloud application getting live, getting into production. So you'll be able to find out, give a KPI like this, and you'll be able to also measure towards it. Third example, you are coming out of one product, one vendor offering, and you're moving into one more vendor offering. In this case, you'll have to see, let's take a simple example of we are on Bitbucket, for example, and you want to move towards GitHub as a source code management platform, and the organization has a given a timeline that in the next 3 years, we should be completely out of Bitbucket and move into GitHub, for example, right? So in this case, what should happen here is this can be given as a KPI to the teams year on year, and we say 30% compliance this year, 40% compliance next year, and things like that. And you'll also be able to measure if the repository is getting shut down on the Bitbucket side and getting opened up on the GitHub side, right? And any new artifact that goes into production, is it going from GitHub or whether it's going to Bitbucket? So you'll be able to track these things. I just called out 2 or 3 KPIs out here, and these can't be measured. I would say these can't be measured manually because an organization will have, thousands of applications. So if you want to go into one by one and see if the KPI is being met, it's going to be very, very difficult. You need to create reports around it to surface out compliance. And the reports are only possible once you have that consolidated registry, which gets information from all different data sources. So it's a practice which cannot be up and running in just one day or 1 month, right? It's going to take some time for you to build that muscle, and you will have to build them incrementally towards the starting from the most wanted aspect that you want to solve for your organization, and then slowly keep building muscle to enhance this platform.
Thank you. I think also with the whole new set of technologies coming in, how do you think that technologies like cloud, AI, DevOps can influence the enterprise architecture?
A lot, right? So I would say AI is very, very disruptive at this point in time. And every team or every BU, whether it's for a production use case or for a non-production use case, they are trying to experiment and see, can this help me to get a competitive edge in the market amongst my customers, right? So, and there is a need for you, for the organization to set up a separate governing body to make sure AI is being properly followed and properly practiced, right? There are companies where we have challenges around, you will not be able to copy paste your code, copy paste your confidential information onto an AI portal and then end up into leakage of PII information or security or creating security loopholes. So a proper governance has to come in. And how can these help enterprise architecture? I would not say it can help enterprise architecture, but you will have to have enterprise architecture controls around these changing trends so that your organization does not enter into any security violations or potential leakage of customer information and things like that. That is one angle to it. From AI angle, from the AI perspective. From DevOps perspective, of course, yes, I would say we need to create standards and patterns around, let's say, the GitHub branching strategy or your code branching strategy. If you're using Bitbucket or GitHub or any source code management platforms, ultimately you need to agree to a standard branching strategy for your developers to follow, for your tech leads to adhere to. So you'll have to create some standards around how do you do it. So that could be a separate document which can be published onto your enterprise architecture platform, and which developers and tech leads can look into and adhere to, right? So that is the way you can enforce standards around DevOps practices, standards around any other development practice, I would say.
Okay. And do you think we have any Gen AI tool which can help us, or maybe available for the options to try it out? Let's say there are any challenges that any enterprise architecture is facing. So are there any Gen AI tools available currently?
I've not explored much here, Nupur, but all I would like to say is like there should definitely be something available. And I would say every architecture management, or I would not even call about architecture management platforms, any application today, let it be Amazon, let it be your own WhatsApp. Now you see a AI component plugged onto it, right? So you see that it's able to give you suggestions based on your previous purchases, based on your previous, or it helps you to write a beautiful text. So starting from WhatsApp to Amazon or any application has an AI component built in. Similarly, any architecture management platform that you have, that is a SaaS offering or a vendor provided platform, today they cannot ignore AI from their platform. So there's going to be an AI component that is linked on to your tool, which is going to help you answer answer your questions, right? So it could be part of a tool, but it is not a specific tool itself. Like how WhatsApp has its own AI inbuilt, Amazon has its own inbuilt. All these architecture management platforms that are given by different vendors also have a AI integration.
Right. The next question we have is in terms of the migration projects,
Mhm.
like from a set of tools to another set of tools because of end of life, what are the key things to consider?
Um, from end of life perspective.
Yes, like basically in terms of the migration projects.
Okay, so migration projects, um, I would not necessarily say end of life is the only angle to look at. Migration could happen because of even application modernization, not necessarily because of end of life, uh, right? But what you consider is you'll have to look into your business use case. That is where I was talking about the lack of connect between business capabilities and the IT landscape, right? That is the problem without enterprise architecture. If you are able to say you have 15 applications and all of them roll out inside one business capability, right? Let's say customer management has one capability, and inside that they might be having 15 tools, right? Now we are trying to modernize one of these tools, right? A proper architecture visualization of where this single application, what the single application contribute towards that business capability. You need to first understand that. And that's the visual which an enterprise architecture platform can give you, right? Once it gives that to you, then you will exactly know this application is solving this part of the problem for this business capability. So the revamped application should also meet the same requirements. So you'll be able to narrow down to the requirements that this application is trying to solve on that larger business capability. And once you know the requirements properly, you will be able to migrate or revamp to a new application satisfying to the same requirements.
The next we have is like somebody's asking agility, velocity, and conflicting business priorities are often the basis on arguments resisting centralized governance models and committees. Okay. Especially when working across business units or location. Can you share techniques or mental models you have used to work through this? And also, I think there is another question related to this only that a lot of project and product team, they are always busy in enhancements. So how do we get them engaged with the EA governance, not seeing them as a burden, instead as an enabler? So yeah.
Yep. To answer both these questions, I would just say one thing, right? It's finally boiling down to your day-to-day tasks in hand versus your strategic asks from the enterprise, right? And this can happen anywhere, right? For example, I have to deliver this to my customers, but I'm being asked by my organization to do this also. How do I prioritize? That's the problem we're talking about. And I feel it's about top down. It should be top driven, right? So there have been many organizations I have heard from my friends that where they have tried to have one single unified architecture, but it did not work out beyond a point, and the teams did not agree to it for whatever reasons, and they could not keep the practice sustain. They could not keep that practice sustainable, right? And the exact reason what you called is the main cause, and everybody have their own priorities, and they don't want to prioritize this, right? So the only way it can happen is through a top-down, communication. The CIOs and the CTO and the entire technology organization has to come together, and this has to come top-down as an instruction that we need to start this. And I would say it can, if your CIO is given a standing instruction from the CTO to start adopting enterprise blueprint, say as a KPI in the next 2 years, right? And it need not happen immediately. You first start creating a platform. You start putting what information you have. You give them a taste, that you give the business units a taste of what it offers, what can it do, and slowly keep building the muscle. At some point in time, with the top-down KPI also coming in, they will automatically see value in this, right? And like what I said, every business unit will have its own evangelist who will kind of drive this thought into their business unit. It could be an architect, point of contact per business unit, and this person can be part of some recurring cadence with the enterprise architecture practice committee, and where they will see the usefulness, where their questions are addressed by this council. You enhance the application, you show them the usefulness, and you ask them to take it back to their business units, and you ask them to accelerate adoption. So it has to be top down, And it can also be a little bit of meetings happening within the committees, having your own point of contacts in every business unit, and making them the ambassadors to drive this message forward. So multiple ways we need to tackle this. There is no one answer. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying something told today will be done tomorrow and it is done. And every organization has, let's take the siloed architecture itself in place, right? Some teams might be using one product to solve this problem. The other BU might be using a different product to solve the same problem. Now the
Right.
enterprise management platform is surfacing this out, saying there are two tools solving the same problem in this enterprise. And let's say we are now told to either use this or that. If that's the prescription, we'll have to look into analyzing both these platforms to see what both of them solve. One team might have a critical roadmap already carved out for the year, and they might not be immediately able to migrate to the other platform. So that time will automatically have to be given as a project for them to phase out from this and to align with the enterprise standard, right? So within these two platforms, which one to use could become a enterprise architecture decision. But for the other team, which is not using this platform today, to converge into using it will become a project in itself for them to come in and adopt.
So I think we just have few more questions left.
Sure.
So we would like to know your thoughts on solution architecture versus enterprise architecture. Like sometimes projects takes solution architecture more serious to align with enterprise architecture. So how do you have them understand the importance of it?
See, ultimately, let's say your application is on cloud and you are using 5 AWS services and 4 Azure services, for example, to solve that problem, right? As per solution architecture, we have given a proper solution which meets to the customer needs, which meets the operational SLAs, which meets all the regulatory requirements. So you're kind of doing everything properly, right? That's where solution architecture comes into, and it's kind of a well-architected solution that's being put onto cloud. Now, enterprise architecture comes back and says, I know some teams are using this AWS service, but we don't want them to use this for so and so reason, right? That is when an alignment will come into play, right? And the alignment of solution architecture towards enterprise will have to be taken into effect. Maybe something is, if organization says as per enterprise architecture, a particular service is prohibited from usage, then the change from the particular application has to be instantaneous, right? But if it is not prohibited, if we say it's restricted, you can use it, but use with caution. Then they can take their own speed time to align to the roadmap, enterprise architecture roadmap, right? Let's say enterprise architecture allows this AWS service as well as this AWS service to build a solution. And say solution architecture is using, already one of them is being used by solution. There is already an alignment in place. There is nothing to worry about, right? I'm not saying enterprise architecture will always come back and say only one solution or one solution to a problem. They might say you can either use this or use that, right? As long as it meets the standards and guidelines. So it might not always be one solution. There could be some solutions where they'll come back and say, this is the only solution. For example, you'll come back and say, ServiceNow is the only solution you should be using for, say, incident management, right? In that case, every organization should comply to it. There cannot be one more tool coming in to solve the problem. But if the enterprise architecture provides you a set of tools which you can use, either one of them can be used, then you're already aligned.
Okay, great. Then somebody's asking, in this disruptive world where there is an urge to deliver value very quickly to the customers, and it's better to be fail fast, how do you see enterprise architecture can be accommodative of it?
Yep. Enterprise architecture doesn't mean we can't fail fast, right? As long as we are, like what I told before, as long as we are using what the organization prescribes, you will be able to build anything faster using those tools, using those standards and best practice. Just because you want to fail fast, I cannot be compromising on some security standard,
Mm-hmm.
or some say I have to implement single sign-on for my application, and I'm doing it in a wrong way for the application, and it kind of goes into production, and it kind of is functioning fine from customer point of view, but you're not following a standard. So fail fast doesn't mean that you can compromise on these standards and guidelines, right? It's going to create security risk for the firm. It's going to create potential damage of reputation for your firm, loss of customers, and a lot of other implications will happen. So enterprise architecture will not slow down the fail fast approach, right? But your enterprise architecture management platform should give you a choice of tools which you can use. For example, you want to send an email to the customer and there is no email capability listed in your platform. You go back to the enterprise architecture team and say, "Hey, I want this prototype to be built and deployed for my customers in the next 1 month. I went into this platform. I don't see any solution that's available for satisfying the email capability, right?" And then architecture team should come back and tell you, immediately give you guidance on which ones you can use, right? So as long as your tool has a wide variety, as long as your platform, architecture platform has a wide variety of tools that helps you to build software in a faster and in an agile and fail fast way, this doesn't slow us down at all. But on a long run, when you want your application to be, now we have deployed a prototype, customers have given a go ahead, and now you want to build this application, keep building all the other functionalities, and you want to now build more muscle around your application, right? At that point in time, it's going to actually help you, because you're already following best practices. You need to continue following the same thing. You need not revamp what you have done before.
Great. So we'll just take the last question. So in
Sure.
your opinion, what trends will shape the future of enterprise architecture governance over the next 5 to 10 years?
I would just say it's more of an organization practice. I'm feeling already many. I would say 10 years before. I have heard many companies architecture was more of prescriptive way of doing things. It used to be when you first take an application to production, it was never revisited later. We used to see a lot of gaps in even the page. Even you could have an architecture page. The first time you go through an architecture review for your application with your senior architect, it would be reviewed. But all the further enhancements, major, minor, everything gets bypassed, right? That kind of trend is all changing now. What I'm seeing is it's becoming a practice, a very conscious practice. And I've in my slides, I have on the last slide, which spoke about the governance model framework, I have put in those 6 different pillars, right? And that is again customizable. All I'm not saying that how will this shape up in future is going to be depending on your own organizational challenges. This is kind of tailor made, right? I'm not saying those 6 are the only tenets you'll have to look for building your governance framework. Your organization might have one more challenge, and you probably bring in a 7th bucket, a 7th tenet towards building this, towards making this framework robust, right? And I feel it's going to be more tailor-made. If you look at probably when you share the presentations, I'll also send you one more small image which you can send to the audience here, Nupur. It is just the 4 quadrant whatever we have from the magic quadrant, whatever they call, right? Whatever they call from Gartner last year, and we have the industry players on enterprise architecture platforms, right? Management platforms. So what are the platforms available today in the industry that you can use to manage your enterprise architecture? So we have platforms available. Those platforms have capability to also give you ability to spin dashboards, right? Which can surface out governance findings, which can surface out useful interpretation of data that is there inside the platform. So I think those will help you to directionally shape up your governance model, I would say. So these tools, when you leverage these SaaS offerings, when you leverage all these platforms, it will automatically guide you towards a thriving enterprise architecture practice. If you are building a homegrown solution for this, then I would say it is more tailor-made to your organizational challenges.
Great. I think we are done in terms of the questions. I think thank you, Mani, once again for graciously sharing your insights and expertise on the topic. The session today not only addressed the questions at hand, but also sparked further thoughts and discussions for sure. So we hope that we will have the pleasure of working with you again in the future. A special thank you goes to every one of you for your presence here today. We look forward to seeing you in the future Zinov events. Take care and stay safe. Have a great week ahead.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you for a great opportunity.